around 1870 to the turn of the millennium, world agriculture was characterized by an economic process that I like to refer to as the agricultural treadmill. That was the time during which farmers around the world produced ever more food for ever more humans at ever declining prices. And this mega trend in world agriculture has come to an end. The turn of the millennium also marks a mega trend reversal in international agricultural markets. Since the turn of the millennium, we've seen an upward trend in international agricultural prices. However, what we've seen in 2007-2008 was a clear-cut deviation from this now upward trend in international food prices. And the reason for this, one of the reasons for this, was that 7 out of the preceding 8 years we had a production deficit in the world. And exactly in this situation, when the stocks were very low, we had a crop failure in Eastern Europe, in Australia, and some other parts of the world. So prices went up. And in this situation, the World Bank published a study that claimed that 70% of this price increase that we've seen in 2007-2008 was the consequence of the rapid growth in biofuel production around the globe. However, biofuel production has continued to go up, and in 2009, prices of agricultural commodities were very low again. And also, what we saw in this situation was that policymakers pointed their fingers at speculators and said it was the speculators that were driving up the prices. However, speculators cannot make the price. Speculators want to make money, and they can make money only if they predict the price, the future price correctly. If they fail to predict the future price correctly, they lose money and are quickly driven out of the market. But what actually happened in this situation was that countries such as China, India, Argentina restricted exports. As a consequence, there were fewer agricultural commodities in international markets, and prices would have been higher without this type of protectionism, new protectionism, let me call it. And it's exactly the same thing that is driving the high prices, one of the things that's driving the high prices in 2010. Russia, which in recent years has one of the most important exporters of wheat, has restricted exports, and the expectation of market participants is that other countries will follow suit and restrict exports also. And just a few days ago, Ukraine announced that it will restrict exports. So these expectations of market participants that policymakers will again repeat the mistake of 2007-2008 is so unrealistic? Not.
Climate change, a drought, was at the basis of this food price spike. And again in Russia this year, the yield of crops has gone down. So 2003, summer of 2003 in France and northern Italy was the hottest summer on record. And in 2003, I've got my notes here, there were 30,000 excess deaths caused by the heat in France alone. Maize yields went down 36% in Italy. Maize and fodder went down 30% in France. Fruit went down 30% in France. Wheat by 20% in France. So the hottest summer on record, 2003, large decrease in agricultural production because of the effects of drought. Now, by the end of the century, the heat of 2003 will be slightly less than an average summer, according to the climate change predictions. So it's that kind of scale of change. What has been the hottest summer on record is going to be average, and by 2040, something like that, there'll be a 25% chance of each summer being as hot as 2003. By the end of the century, over a 50% chance of each summer being hotter than 2003. So climate change is a very, very real driver of both our inability to meet food demand, but also the fluctuations in the market, and therefore the price volatility that we see.
I think that's a very valid observation. I mean, last December we were talking climate change. In September this year we were talking Millennium Development Goals, and in October we are talking biodiversity. While this is a valid observation, I think what we have to realize is that all of these are long-term environmental or development challenges, and in fact the international community has been engaged in addressing all of them, as well as many others, over a much longer time horizon. In fact, biodiversity and climate change, the international process, one could say began with the signature of the two conventions in 1991. So there's a long process underway. What key events like the Copenhagen summit or the summit in Nagoya do is focalize the attention of the broader society, not just the people who are engaged in the science or policy making on a particular issue, but engage the broader society. And in that sense, this event is also one example. And I think that does not mean that we are not dealing with the other problems while we are focusing on biodiversity today. Another thing to note is that it's easy to feel submerged by the proliferation of problems we as a global society are confronting. But at the same time, one has to realize that a lot of solutions are actually interlinked. And so some of the things we need to do to address biodiversity loss are quite closely tied to some of the responses we need to address climate change. I mean, just to give one example, there's been a lot of talk in recent years about reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. And that's actually a model for payments of ecosystem services, the ecosystem service being carbon storage in this case. Now, how we implement that can be done in a way that is good for biodiversity, could be neutral for biodiversity, or bad for biodiversity, because biodiversity is very spatially specific. So if we focus on carbon sequestration efforts in areas which are also biodiversity rich, we could actually address two goals at one time. On the other hand, if we go the other route, for example, focusing on monoculture plantations, which sequester carbon, that might not be as good for biodiversity. So the basic point is that, yes, there are many problems. No, they are not being addressed on a month-by-month basis, even though we focalize attention to them at certain periods. And many of the solutions are actually quite interlinked.
And you say to find the right solution, we have to find things, I mean, the Kinder egg, three in one.
Well, I would say that, not all solutions have to be interlinked, and there might be unique solutions to the climate change problem which might have nothing to do with biodiversity. But there are plenty of things where there might be synergies, and there might be some responses where there might be conflicts. So at a minimum, we need to avoid the conflicts between two objectives, and in the best case scenario, we should try to promote synergies.